The camera didn't lie. It didn't flinch, didn't look away, didn't spare me. It just rolled, unblinking, merciless, as my wife leaned against the kitchen counter in a robe I'd bought her for Christmas. Laughing. Laughing in a way I hadn't seen in years. And then, without hesitation, reaching for the man across from her. The repairman. That word stung now. Like a joke someone keeps telling long after it stopped being funny. He wasn't holding a wrench this time. Just her waist. I paused the video. Sat back in the chair like I'd been shot. The room around me swayed gently, like I was on a boat in the middle of a slow-moving storm. I stared at the still frame on the monitor, her face tilted up toward him, mouth half open, hair falling over one shoulder. This was my kitchen. My home. The space where we used to slow dance barefoot while pasta boiled on the stove. Where we whispered over wine, argued over bills, helped our daughter with homework, folded laundry, whispered apologies, kissed goodnight. Now it looked like a crime scene. And I couldn't decide who I was in the story anymore, the husband? The fool? The ghost? I leaned forward, pressed play again. Because sometimes the only way out is through. Before all this, I would have told you our marriage was solid. Not flashy, not cinematic, but real, the kind of love that gets its hands dirty, that survives long drives with screaming kids, that stumbles through flu seasons and job changes and burnt dinners and still, somehow, chooses to stay. Her name's Madeline. Maddie, to everyone who knew her before me. She hated being called Maddie with an I-E, said it felt like a cheerleader's nickname, too soft, too bouncy. She wasn't that. She was whip-smart, dry-witted, the kind of woman who could argue about Tolstoy and then fall asleep watching trash TV with a bowl of popcorn on her chest. I loved that about her. We met in a bookstore, of all places. She was standing in front of the repair manual section, holding a copy of How to Fix Just About Anything, looking as out of place as a violin in a metal band. I joked that if she was going to fake interest in tools, she should at least be in the right aisle. She gave me a look that could have frozen fire. But then she smiled. And that smile, it's the kind that stays with you, the kind that softens you from the inside out. We dated fast, married slow. Maddie was cautious with her heart. She had a mother who left, a father who worked too much, and a history she kept folded like a note at the back of her wallet, always there, never discussed. But I waited. I was patient. I showed up. I loved her as best I knew how. The first years were sweet, even in their imperfections. We bought a fixer-upper in a sleepy neighborhood with cracked sidewalks and crabapple trees. Painted it ourselves. The color was called maple mist, but it always looked more like eggshell in the morning light. We laughed about that, standing barefoot on the lawn with paint in our hair, drinking gas station coffee and pretending to be adults. When our daughter, Evie, was born, Maddie held her like she was something fragile and holy. I remember watching them in the hospital room, Evie's tiny fingers gripping one of Maddie's, and thinking, this is it. This is everything. We were tired, broke, overwhelmed, and so stupidly in love it felt like we were floating. Even the hard years didn't crack us, not really. The miscarriages. The recession. The stretch when I lost my job and she picked up 2 part-time ones to cover the bills. She never made me feel like less. She said, we're a team. And I believed her. I still do, in a way. That's the twisted part. It wasn't until last fall that I felt something shift. Small things. The way she stopped singing to the radio while cooking. The way her phone started living face down on the table. The way she flinched when I touched her lower back, like the spot had become unfamiliar, or worse, claimed. But then she'd smile like nothing had changed, wrap her arms around me and say, you're overthinking. So I believed her. Again. I told myself we were just in a valley. Marriage has seasons, right? This was just winter. And I tried. God, I tried. I planned date nights. I cleaned the house. I left notes in her coat pockets. I made her coffee just the way she liked it, black with cinnamon, no sugar, in the yellow mug with the little chip in the rim. The one she said made it taste better. I didn't realize, not then, that she'd stopped drinking it. She just poured it out when I wasn't looking. The kitchen repairs started in December. We had a leaky faucet and loose cabinet hinges. She told me she'd found a guy through a local Facebook group, someone named Nate. Said he was cheap and quick and came with 5-star reviews. I didn't argue. I had just picked up extra hours on a new project at work and figured we could use the help. The first time I saw him, he was standing in our driveway, loading a toolbox into his truck. Tall, lean, older than me by maybe 10 years. Wore a worn denim jacket and had this casual confidence about him, like someone who was used to being wanted. I shook his hand. He smiled too easily. "He's just the repair guy," Maddie said when I asked why he was here a second time in the same week. "The sink's still dripping." And it was. But the third time, it wasn't the sink. It was the backsplash. Then the floor tile. Then the microwave. It became a joke between us, our part-time roommate. She laughed. I laughed. But something inside me tightened each time. Some ancient alarm clock in my chest began to buzz. Still, I trusted her. That's the part one can't forgive myself for. Not the missed signs. Not the doubt. Not even the jealousy. It's that I kept choosing her, every day, every hour, while she had already stopped choosing me. And then came the camera. The motion sensor I installed just before we went on vacation, meant to deter porch pirates and package thieves. I forgot to turn off the indoor setting after we returned. A week later, I was scrolling through clips, looking for footage of a raccoon that kept getting into the trash, and stumbled across something else. Something worse. A 34-minute video. Timestamped 1:12 p.m. on a Wednesday. Maddie. The robe. Him. The kitchen. I watched it. I watched every second. And when it ended, I sat there for hours. The coffee had gone cold. The house had gone quiet. And the man I used to be had started to disappear. The kitchen was still. So still it felt staged, like a set abandoned between scenes. No clatter of dishes, no radio murmuring in the corner, no steam curling from the kettle. Just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the kind of silence that makes you feel watched by ghosts. I stepped inside barefoot, the floor cold beneath me, and walked straight to the counter, drawn to it like a moth to a flame that no longer burned. There it was. Her mug. The yellow one with the chipped rim. A line of glaze missing just beneath the lip, a flaw she swore gave it character. I reached for it without thinking, my fingers curling around the ceramic as naturally as if I were reaching for her hand. It was still faintly warm. Not hot. Not fresh. Just warm, like it had recently held something, briefly, before being forgotten. Like something that had meant something. Once. I stood there for what must have been a full minute, holding the empty cup in both hands. The crack in it was shallow, but enough to run a fingertip along. I remembered how she teased me for noticing it. "You treat this thing like it's made of bone china," she laughed once, sipping her coffee on a Sunday morning, hair wild, sweatshirt too big. "It's a cup, not a heart." But it was both, wasn't it? I lifted the mug to my face. Nothing but the faintest trace of cinnamon and a memory. Still, it was enough. Because then I heard her laugh. Not now. Not here. But from the video. From the echo in my mind that wouldn't stop playing on a loop. That particular laugh, the one she used when she was trying not to like someone but couldn't help herself. I set the mug down, carefully. The sound of ceramic against countertop felt loud in the hush. She was going to walk in, I thought. Right now. She was going to appear in the doorway, tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, flash that half-smile that made forgiveness feel like inevitability, and say, "You think too much." And maybe I did. Maybe I always had. While she lived in moments, I lived in meanings. While she danced in kitchens, I diagrammed emotions like blueprints. Trying to build a life where everything fit. I turned away from the mug, went into the living room, and sat in front of the screen again. The video was still open. Paused. Her face, frozen mid-laugh. His arm behind her, fingers brushing the edge of her hip like he belonged there. I stared at it. Then hovered my finger over the delete icon. Just press it. Erase it. Clean the slate. But I couldn't. My finger trembled. Hovered. Fell away. Because the truth is ugly. But it's real. And it was the only thing we had left. Everything else between us had been a performance, a blur of habit and obligation and nostalgia dressed up as intimacy. But this was undeniable. This was herself, unveiled, unguarded. Even if it wasn't with me. I slammed the laptop shut like I was trying to trap the ghosts inside. My pulse throbbed in my ears. I stood and walked down the hall, past the family portraits that suddenly felt like artifacts from someone else's life, and into the bedroom. The air smelled faintly of her lotion, lavender and lemon peel. Her side of the bed was made, too tightly. Her robe was gone. I stood in the doorway, unsure why I'd come here, until my eyes fell on the nightstand drawer. I opened it. Books, lip balm, tissues, a charger cable. And beneath them, something with a cloth cover the color of old wine. A journal. I hadn't seen it before. Or maybe I had and hadn't thought much of it, just another notebook in a house full of them. I hesitated. My hand hovered like it had over the delete button. But there's a point where hesitation becomes permission. I lifted it gently and opened to the first page. Her handwriting greeted me, looped and precise, the way it always had been. It wasn't a daily journal. Not a log. More like fragments. Thoughts. Small observations jotted down like whispered confessions she didn't want to say aloud. I flipped through slowly. Some pages were blank. Others held quotes or doodles. A line from a song. A paragraph about Evie sleeping on her chest. A note to herself to buy more basil, circled twice. And then I found it. Halfway down a page, squeezed between a scribble and a wine stain, like it hadn't meant to be written at all. I don't feel alive with him anymore. I read it once. Then again. Then a third time, tracing each word like they might rearrange themselves into something less final. I don't feel alive with him anymore. There was no date. No context. Just the sentence. Bleak. Quiet. Unforgiving. The breath left my lungs slowly. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the journal open in my lap, the soft echo of her voice still hanging in the room like perfume. I didn't feel betrayed, not in that moment. I felt, explained. Like the ground had finally stopped shifting because now I knew what had caused the quake. It wasn't about the repairman. Not really. He was just the exit door she'd found after years of wandering the hallways of our life, looking for a window to open. And she had written it down. Not for me. Not for anyone. Just for herself. A truth she'd buried. A truth I'd just unearthed. And it was louder than any lie she'd ever told. I kept turning the pages like I was searching for oxygen, something to breathe in, something to hold on to. Most of them were hers now. Short thoughts. Vague entries. Some whole pages with only a sentence. But then the handwriting changed. I blinked. It was smaller, blockier. Not elegant like hers, but familiar in a way that made my stomach twist. It was mine. My own handwriting, staring back at me from the past. I ran my thumb across the page, the ink slightly faded, the paper soft with time. My mind began to reel backward, searching for context, for memory. And then I saw it. The front inside cover, something I had missed when I flipped open the journal so urgently. Our names. Mine and hers. And below them, scrawled in my old, hopeful hand. We will write to each other when we can't say it out loud. My breath caught. It all came rushing back, a warm flood of memory and ache. We'd started the journal in the first year of our marriage. A shared project. A safe place. A secret language. Something silly at first, a couple's experiment, she called it, grinning as she nudged me with a pen. For all the stuff we can't fit between dishes and diapers and to-do lists. We promised to write in it whenever the words got stuck. When silence grew too wide. When pride got in the way. And I had forgotten. I had forgotten all of it. But she hadn't. She had kept writing. Quietly. Without expectation. Without answer. Like tossing bottled messages into a sea that had stopped answering back. I flipped through again, this time slower. Some pages were hers. But some were mine. Written long ago. Dusty with time and naivete. And then one stopped me cold. It was dated 7 years ago. I feel that we are losing ourselves. But I don't know how to tell her about it. I'm afraid that if I do, everything will fall apart. I read it again, not just with my eyes but with something deeper. I remembered that night. The fight we didn't have. The words I swallowed. The way I rolled over in bed and stared at the ceiling, wondering when we had stopped touching, stopped listening, stopped laughing for real. I thought I was protecting us by keeping quiet. That she'd feel burdened if I spoke the truth. But she must have felt it too. And suddenly, I saw the whole damn thing from a different angle, like someone shifting a painting and realizing it was upside down the whole time. She was afraid too. We were both afraid. Both silent. Both lost in a marriage filled with words we never said. Then I turned to the very last page. The final entry. The ink was darker, newer. Written in her hand. The loops a little rushed, like she hadn't intended to write but couldn't hold it in anymore. I would like to tell him the truth. But it's too late now. And maybe he has long since stopped looking at me as alive. That sentence hit harder than the video ever could. Because she wasn't excusing it. She wasn't proud. She wasn't even trying to justify it. She was mourning. Not just what she did. But what we both lost before she ever crossed that line. I sat there in the quiet, the journal trembling in my lap, the walls of the room suddenly too full of history. Too full of ghosts. The old me would have stormed out. Slammed doors. Demanded answers. But not this version. Not the man who had just read his own handwriting and remembered how long ago he'd felt the unraveling begin. And done nothing. Instead, I picked up a pen. And I turned to a fresh page. Not to explain. Not to absolve. But to answer. To meet her in the silence where we had once promised to speak. I wrote slowly, letting the weight of each word sink in. I don't know who we have become. But I remember who we were. And if you remember too. Tell me. Not with words. With your actions. I placed the pen down. Closed the journal for a moment, letting the words settle like dust in a sunbeam. Then I reopened it to that last page, the one I'd just written, and left it there. Exposed. An invitation. A mirror. A wound. A thread. I stood, placed the journal on the edge of the bed, her side, and smoothed the cover with the palm of my hand. The sheet still smelled faintly like her shampoo. Citrus and pine. I didn't know what she'd do. Didn't know if she'd even read it. But this time, the silence between us wasn't a wall. It was a door. And it was open. The house was still when she returned. So still, it felt like the walls were holding their breath. I sat in the kitchen, alone. Same place as always. Same cracked mug beside me, though now it was empty, cold. Outside, the wind stirred the trees. Branches scratched softly against the windows like they were trying to warn me. Or maybe apologize. I don't know. Then, finally. The creak of the front step. The subtle shift of weight on old wood. And then, the key. That slow, metallic scrape inside the lock. It had always sounded like coming home. Tonight, it sounded like judgment. The door opened. She didn't call out. Didn't say, "I'm back," or "Where are you," the way she used to. Her heels made careful contact with the hardwood as she stepped inside, like someone trying not to wake a sleeping child. She moved through the house with the restraint of a stranger, pausing just beyond the hallway. I could feel her presence before I saw her. And then, she entered the doorway of the kitchen. Still in her work clothes. Hair slightly windblown. Eyes tired, but not swollen from crying. Just quiet. That kind of quiet that comes after a long decision. Her gaze found it immediately. The diary. Right there on the bed this morning. Now on the kitchen table. I had moved it before she got home. Not to accuse her. Not to trap her. But to offer it. Like a letter you leave behind before disappearing. She didn't pick it up. Didn't even reach for it. Just, looked. That gaze, frozen between fear and defiance. Like she didn't want to know which of us had broken first. Seconds stretched long and thin between us, like strings pulled tighter with every heartbeat. The tension wasn't loud. It wasn't a fight. It was worse than that. It was the stillness after the earthquake, when you wait to see what's been left standing. She didn't sit down. She didn't speak. So I did. My voice barely made it past my lips. Did you read something? The question lingered in the air, like smoke from a long-extinguished fire. She blinked, slow. Her throat shifted. Her hands, still curled around her purse strap, trembled so slightly it was almost imperceptible. She didn't answer right away. But then. A single breath. Not deep. Not forced. And then, finally. And you? 3 words. That's all. But they landed like a riddle at my feet. A new puzzle dropped into an already crumbling map. I stared at her. Eyes locked. Trying to read beneath the words. And you? What did she mean? Did she mean her entry, that final confession of guilt and doubt? Did she think I'd seen something else? Was there more I hadn't read? Or was it not about the diary at all? Was she asking me if I had looked at myself? Really looked? Had I read my own entries? The ones where I first started slipping away? Had I read the distance in my own silence, the quiet ways I stopped showing up, even as I stayed in the room? Or, God help me, was she asking if I had someone too? Was this her way of saying, I'm not the only one who vanished? You just did it slower. I didn't answer her. Because I didn't know which answer she wanted. Or which one I believed myself. She looked at the diary again. Still didn't touch it. The light from the window broke across the table in thin gold streaks, landing across the worn leather cover like a question mark. A breath caught in her throat. She opened her mouth as if to say something. Then closed it again. And in that pause, I realized something terrifying. We were no longer speaking in words. We were speaking in gaps. In glances. In the things we weren't brave enough to name. And somehow, those things said more than all the arguments we never had. She stepped forward, 1 foot. Just one. And the floor creaked beneath her, like it, too, didn't know if it could bear the weight. The diary was right there, Inches away. And still she hesitated. Because once you open something, you can't pretend you never saw what's inside. Just like me and the video. Just like her and the truth. I leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice quiet. Tell me what you meant, I said, finally. But she shook her head. And whispered. Not with words. Then she turned, slow and uncertain, and walked toward the hallway, leaving me there, alone, again. With the diary. And the silence. She had disappeared down the hallway, leaving only the whisper of her voice behind, not with words. And I had stayed seated in the kitchen, the clock ticking too loudly, the fridge humming like it knew something I didn't. I didn't follow her. I didn't know if I was supposed to. The house had grown impossibly quiet again. As if the walls were holding their breath. As if the foundation itself was listening in, waiting to see which of us would speak first. I sat there, hands folded in front of the diary, trying to hold on to that one thread of connection we'd stitched between us. Then. A buzz. My phone. Screen glowing against the dimness of the counter. A number I didn't recognize. I stared at it for a moment before answering, thinking maybe it was a work thing. Or maybe something about Evie. My heart skipped in that familiar, irrational panic every parent carries like a shadow. But it wasn't work. And it wasn't about Evie. It was a text. I don't want any problems. She said you haven't been together for a long time. Just that. Just those words. No name. No context. But I didn't need any. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. It wasn't just betrayal now. It was betrayal rewritten. She hadn't just crossed a line. She had moved the line entirely. Erased me from her version of events. Told someone, him, probably, that we weren't together anymore. That I was gone. That this marriage, this life, this home, was already over. It felt like the final erasure. Like being ghosted out of your own biography. I stared at the words on my screen, rereading them until they burned. I don't want any problems. Problems? What did he think I was, a threat? An obstacle? A man who might suddenly set fire to the ruins just because he had finally seen what was left of them. But no, that wasn't the part that got me. The part that hollowed me out was this. She said you haven't been together for a long time. Not that she cheated. Not that she strayed. But that I had already been made irrelevant. To him, I wasn't a husband. I was a footnote. A ghost that had long since left the house. A name mentioned once, maybe twice, and then discarded like a coffee mug with a chip in the rim. I stood up, the chair scraping back against the tile. My legs felt heavy. Like walking underwater. I looked around the kitchen as if I might find some evidence that I was still here. That I mattered. I opened drawers. Found the note Evie drew me last Christmas. Opened the fridge. There was still my favorite juice. Half drunk. I had just bought it. The dishwasher was full of our plates. Our mess. And yet, somewhere out there, she had told a stranger that we were over. That I was gone. That we hadn't been together in a long time. God. How long had she been preparing for a world without me? How long had she been quietly repainting our history in colors I'd never approved? I wanted to scream. Break something. Or maybe just walk until the streetlights stopped. Instead, I stood there in the middle of the kitchen, anchored by nothing, and that's when I saw it. A letter. Small. Folded 3 times. Left exactly where the diary had been. Like she had swapped one kind of truth for another. I picked it up slowly. The paper was warm from the sunlight still crawling across the countertop. My name wasn't written on it. But it didn't need to be. I opened it. The handwriting was hers. Neater than the diary. Controlled. One sentence. I lie when I don't know how to ask for forgiveness. I read it again. And again. And each time, something loosened inside my chest, not anger, not sadness, but something heavier than both. Recognition. That sentence wasn't an excuse. It wasn't a justification. It wasn't even a request. It was a confession. One that cost her to write. One that she probably wrote and rewrote a dozen times before daring to leave behind. Because some people lie to hurt. And some people lie because they've run out of ways to be seen. I set the letter down gently. Stared at it. My pulse still pounded with the ache of that text, of that realization that I had been edited out of her story. But maybe that was only half the story. Maybe the other half was right here. In one folded piece of paper. In one act of staying. Of not running anymore. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if this would end with goodbye or rebuilding or something messier in between. But for the first time, I understood that both of us had been afraid. She had lied. I had disappeared. We had both failed each other in different dialects of silence. But she had left me a line to hold on to. I lie when I don't know how to ask for forgiveness. And maybe, just maybe, that was her way of finally asking. She didn't come out that night. The door to our bedroom remained closed. Not locked, just closed. Like a sentence that hadn't found its ending. There were no words. No footsteps toward me. No gentle creak of hinges or half-whispered apologies. Just the soft, steady glow of light leaking out beneath the door. And her shadow, long and slow-moving, crossing by now and then like a thought she wasn't ready to speak. I lay on the couch, knees drawn to my chest, arms folded tight. Not in grief. Not even in defense. Just instinct. Just the posture of a man who no longer knew if he had the right to call himself a man. The diary rested on my chest. Her note was folded inside, close to my heart. That one sentence, the one she hadn't said, couldn't say, felt heavier than anything she'd ever screamed. Heavier than the betrayal, heavier than the silence. I lie when I don't know how to ask for forgiveness. That was all I had now. And somehow, it was enough to stay up through the night. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just listened. To the house. To the walls. To the silence we had made, brick by careful brick, over the years. The kind of silence that starts as compromise. Grows into routine. And eventually hardens into armor. We had built it together, without meaning to. One swallowed feeling at a time. I laid there through the night while the hours slid by, slow and shapeless. The old hour was gone, the new one hadn't yet begun. The in-between. That place you end up after you stop being who you were, but before you become whatever comes next. At 6, I rose. The sky outside was a soft gray, the kind that makes even the wind seem gentle. I moved quietly into the kitchen. Everything felt untouched. Sacred in its stillness. As if any sudden sound would collapse what fragile truth we'd finally dared to say. I reached for the cupboard and pulled out her mug. The yellow one. The rim still cracked. Still slightly chipped in that perfect imperfection she once said made it, not a heart. She was wrong. It was a heart. That crack. That was us. That fracture, that weakness, that was the whole point. Because the heart isn't whole by being untouched. It's whole by surviving the breaking. By carrying the fault lines. By beating anyway. I poured the coffee. No sugar. No milk. Just black and honest. Then I walked to her door. Still closed. Still glowing faintly underneath. Still hers. I crouched down. And gently, like a prayer, like the way you set down a memory you're afraid to smudge, I slid the diary under the door. It caught halfway, as if even the floor needed to hold on to something. And on the final page, beneath her last confession, I had written, "I heard you. Now it's your turn. Even if it is silent. Even if for the last time. Even if it's when you're saying goodbye. Tell me that I was. That we were. That at least one day was real. And I will go in peace. And I will love you. Even from a distance." I waited a while. But not for an answer. Answers aren't always spoken. Sometimes they come in the way someone looks at you one last time. Or in the way they don't. At noon, I left the house. No suitcase. No packed bag. No declaration. I didn't leave to punish her. I didn't leave to be followed. I left because I had said everything I had to say. In the only way we'd ever really listened, quietly, honestly, without armor. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. There was no wind. Just a stillness that didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. I walked down the steps, past the garden we once planted together. Past the maple tree Evie used to climb before she got too tall. I didn't look back. Because love, real love, doesn't always mean holding on. Sometimes, it means letting go. Not in bitterness. Not in rage. But in grace. And that was the gift she gave me, even in her failure. That love can still be love. Even when it ends. Even when it breaks. Even when you walk away. And mine. The love I carried for her. Was finally free. Not to hold. But to release. And that's how I left her. Not forgotten. Not erased. But loved. From a distance. Forever.